Welcome back to The Nation. New Zealanders voted to keep MMP at the last election. Now the Electoral Commission has suggested there should be some changes to the system. It wants to stop parties becoming eligible for list seats simply by winning one electorate seat. There's also a warning that over time, electorate seats will outnumber list seats, which the Commission says will result in a less diverse parliament. Joining me now to discuss the changes is Labour Party President Moira Coastworth and Anti-MMP campaigner Jordan Williams. And Christchurch, we have former MP and Progressive Party leader Jim Anderton, and in Wellington, Green MP Holly Walker. Thank you all for being here this morning. Jim Anderton, if I can start with you in Christchurch, the elimination of the one-seat threshold, you were a one-seater, Jim Anderton. Do you think that one-seat threshold should remain?
Well, in theory at the time it seemed a reasonable thing to do as a bolster for someone who'd won an electorate seat, which wasn't a usual thing to happen. In fact, I was the first MP to do it from a major party. But I think the prostitution of that system with the cups of tea and the deal-making going on has completely, that system has lost credibility, and I can understand why the Royal Commission has recommended that it be ended.
Jordan, the one-seat threshold does allow for this coattailing. We saw that quite beautifully illustrated by Rodney Hyde in the last election, 2008. Do you think that should go?
I don't think that there was any legitimate campaign organisation during the referendum arguing that it should stay. I can understand why the Royal Commission had it in there at the beginning, but I think the farce that we've seen time and time again, both from National and Labour, means it's time for it to go.
Moira, what do you say?
Yes, I agree. The people of New Zealand quite clearly find that not in the spirit of MMP.
OK. Holly Walker, in Wellington, what do the Greens, how do they view this?
I think it sounds like the whole panel's in agreement this morning, Rachel. I mean, from our perspective, we think that the electoral system needs to be as fair as possible, and what we have at the moment is a situation where the votes of electors and some electorates have a greater bearing on the makeup of Parliament than others, and that's just not fair. So members of the Royal Commission have actually said they consider including the one-seat threshold to be their one mistake originally. I think it's time for it to go. OK, Holly, I want to stay with you on this. Let's talk about the 5% threshold. Should that be dropped, do you think, to 4%? Well, I think if you are going to remove the one-seat threshold, which certainly it seems like there's a strong consensus for doing, you do need to do something to offset that barrier to entry, if you like, because another important thing about our electoral system is it needs to be proportional, and New Zealanders have voted very clearly to maintain MMP, which is a proportional system. And to make sure that it remains proportional, we do need representation from parties from all across the political spectrum. Okay. So lowering the threshold allows for greater proportionality in Parliament. OK, Jim Anderton, if I can bring you in here. New Zealand First wanted to stay at 5%, and to be fair, they said that when they were both in and out of Parliament. What do you make of this? Should it be lowered to 4? Should it remain at 5?
Well, the Royal Commission originally recommended 4%, and it was lifted to 5 when the bill went through the House. I personally think 4 is a fairer threshold, particularly if you're going to remove the ability for the electorate one seat to take other seats in. So it's a compromise, but it was originally the Royal Commission's first choice, and I would agree with it.
Who does it benefit, do you think, keeping it at 5%, Moira?
I think that representation is what's really important. We've got a House of Representatives, and 4% is fairer in terms of representation. When I agree with Jim that 4% was what was recommended, but the population's also increased, so actually dropping it down from 5% to 4% is pretty much keeps that real level as it was.
Jordan Williams, you're shaking your head.
Well, if we were searching for any fairness, we wouldn't have a threshold at all. I mean, even Winston Peters, as you mentioned, hardly a champion of stable government, even he argues that it should stay at 5%. As, of course, does Michael Cullen, I note in his submission, said that you wouldn't want to lower, that you should be very cautious of lowering the threshold because the cost is stable government. Now, we voted for MMP and we voted for MMP with improvements. One of the big problems with MMP is you often have the tail wagging the dog. By lowering that threshold, you make it more likely that tails will wag the dogs and potentially smaller tails.
Moira, should you be allowed to stand as an electorate MP as well as a list MP?
Yes, well, the Commission's decided that you need to be able to do both. I think that it would really have a negative effect if the people who were standing on the list wouldn't run in electorates. You want people connected to the local community, so we do want skilled MPs standing.
It does work well for Labour, doesn't it? Because Clayton Cosgrove didn't win his electorate seat, but he could come in on the list.
It's very few MPs. Christchurch was affected by the earthquake. I think in this last time there are 2 examples where MPs have come in like that, but there are a lot of senior MPs who contest in electorates, and people, they're connected to a community and people see them. Auckland examples would be David Parker in Epsom, or Tim Grosser, who's never going to win against David Cunliffe. So it's about people connecting with local communities, which is good democracy.
Jordan, isn't that confusing? Doesn't it that just undermine, in essence, the electorate MP?
Well, the thing is that from a party boss's point of view, you want your electorate MPs to be thinking, if I don't get back in an electorate, I need to make sure that I can get back on the list. So that puts a large amount of power in people such as Moira that run these parties. We argued that the other problem, as well as that threshold and the power of the small parties, was the power of party bosses. We're really disappointed that nothing in these preliminary recommendations address that fundamental problem of MMP.
Moira?
I was just going to say, I think the power of party bosses is a bit of a myth in democratic parties that are moving, as we are, to become more democratic as we speak.
Well, no, they specifically rejected more transparency in list ranking and list selection. Again, an obvious improvement to our democracy to make list MPs more accountable to members. Look, I will say, Holly, the exceptions, of course, are the Greens. You guys have by far the best system and most democratic system in terms of ranking your list, so I definitely put that proviso there.
Talk us through that, Holly. Tell us, what is your system?
Well, at the moment, all members of the Green Party vote on our party list, so it's a fully open and transparent democratic system, and it works very well. We get a very diverse list, much more diverse in terms of representation of women, of Māori, of ethnic minorities, of rainbow communities on our list, and I think it's a really important factor of diversity. The Commission did recommend parties might like to look at greater internal transparency. It's good to see Labour's doing that, and I think it would be good if other parties took that on board as well.
Labour hasn't been that transparent, hasn't it? Why not?
We've had very democratic list processes. We have 6 regional conferences and then a final moderating committee, I think, who Jordan's referring to.
Exactly, they're all closed.
Yeah, well, we're moving to have very clear criteria that are strategic, that are shared. So we're moving, and if you have a look at our review, we're moving to have as democratic processes as possible.
OK, Jim Anderton, should they be opened up to the media, do you think?
No, I don't. Look, there's a mythology here. If you want to look at the 125 years of New Zealand Parliament until 1984, when I first went into Parliament, there had been 1,300 members of Parliament, and 16 of those members had been women. 16 out of 1,300. So what were the party bosses doing then? I mean, you know, we want a representative parliament. We never had one. We had no Maori ever elected to a general seat. We had no Pacific Island representation, all the rest of it. I mean, the Parliament of New Zealand now is far more democratic and representative than it's ever been. And Jordan's talking rubbish when he talks about that sort of thing.
Jordan, you're talking rubbish?
Jim's ignoring that around the Western world there are more minorities and women represented in Parliament, and that's a great thing. My problem, I mean, on your theory, Jim, you're saying that if members of political parties or if the public could have an input in terms of list selection and list ranking, you're saying that they'd be less representative? I don't think that's, that's a necessary consequence.
Rachel, the reality is this, that if people cast their mind to the local body elections, when previously you used to have hospital boards, electricity boards, water boards, you name it, and hundreds of names used to appear in the newspapers and on the ballot papers for people to choose from. How well informed were the general public on that? And how well informed can they be on selecting individual candidates for political parties? The truth is, if people want to have a real say in that, they should join political parties and be part of the participatory process.
But it doesn't
Otherwise,
matter.
you get people.
It's the boards of the various parties. There's not even a requirement for the members of the parties to be those that determine the party lists.
That might be so in the National Party, but there's member participation.
Well, quite right. But I mean, look at the influence the unions have in Labour. I mean, that's hardly a transparent process. That's just dishing out, making more party bosses. And it's closed room, it's secretive, and it's one of the problems with MMP that the Commission should have addressed.
We did want to get ACT's perspective on this, I do have to point out, but John Banks said that he doesn't do panels, so he wouldn't join us this morning. Moira, just quickly, what do you think Parliament will agree to in regards to these changes?
Well, I think the people spoke in the referendum. They wanted MMP with some improvements. I think the Commission's done a good job of consulting. There have been almost 5,000 submissions. What people want is clear, so I hope that Parliament will take the Commission's report and the submissions seriously and make the changes that New Zealanders want to have a fairer, simpler MMP system.
Do you really think National will?
Well, that's the test.
It is indeed. Jordan, what do you think?
I think there needs to be a broad consensus on what improvements are to the system. Reading the commentary over the last few days, there seems to be a lot of criticisms from various ends of the spectrum. I think that unless the Commission can find those common threads of where we do have broad consensus as to how there can be genuine improvements, this is going to turn into a political football.
Jim Anderton, what do you think? Because let's face it, what the Electoral Commission is suggesting here isn't going to benefit National really in any way.
Well, I think we've had an independent commission, and I think history will tell us that by and large they've got the recommendations for electoral change right. So I think it would be good if politicians just kept out of this and adopted the Royal Commission's recommendations, and that would, I think, satisfy most of the people in New Zealand who want to see a fair and equitable system of election in this country. OK,
Holly Walker, what do you think the Greens will think? How do you think that the Parliament will Parliament agree to it?
Well, look, it's not about what's in the interest of any particular political party. It's about what produces the fairest and most representative electoral system for New Zealand going forward. And Jordan talks about a broad consensus. I think we have that. We have 58% of the public voting to keep MMP. We have the vast majority of the submissions making very clear points about the one-seat threshold and lowering the 4% threshold. I think it behoves Parliament, it behoves the National Party government and all of us MPs to respect the process, which has been very robust, and to keep our personal and party interests out of it. OK,
Jordan, I just want to put it to you. Why do you think that ACT and United Future are both reluctant to front and discuss anything about this?
Well, the centre and the centre-right haven't really had much of a strategy in terms of this referendum. They Simon Power ensured it was at the election, so we didn't have a genuine debate. I think possibly they wanted it to go away, and quite possibly, unless there is a broad consensus, it's going to be very easy for these recommendations to be shelved, especially if it turns into this political debate that we're already seeing.
All right, Jordan Williams, we do have to leave it there. Thank you for your time. Also, Labour Party President Moira Coastworth, Jim Anderton and Holly Walker in Wellington and Christchurch for us. Thank you all for your time.